Welcome back to The Doctor Is In with Dr. Nadia Sabeh. I'm Dana Swadan, Dr. Sabeh's producer. This episode is part of our What Plants Crave series, where Dr. Sabeh speaks with growers, researchers, and other experts in controlled environment agriculture to get their insights about the direction of the industry and, of course, what exactly it is that plants crave. Today's episode features Travis Higginbotham. Travis joined Harborside Inc. in 2021 as Vice President of Production, where he spearheads production and product distribution to expand access to Harborside products and better serve customers as demand for high-quality cannabis continues to rise. Thank you for listening.
Hi, I'm Nadia Sabeh, President of Dr. Greenhouse and host of The Doctor Is In. Welcome to our special series, What Plants Crave. Today's guest is Travis Higginbotham, Vice President of Harborside, a cannabis cultivation company here in California. Hi, Travis. It's so great to have you on What Plants Crave. I'm super excited to talk to you and learn more about you, about the plants that you grow, and the quirks of growing those plants in greenhouses and indoors.
Thank you, Nadia. Happy to be here and excited also. So jump into it.
So first, tell us a little bit about yourself and the long path that you've taken to the position that you have today at Harborside.
Oh gosh, it's been a wild ride, to say the least. Wild but fun. You know, my background is in ornamental crop production, as you know, and I have a master's in horticulture, and so kind of started out on the commercial greenhouse ornamental track, and I've worked with some of the larger growers here in the country and done a lot of work with like Lowe's, product development, working on new genetics with multiple different floricultural crop species. But yeah, after that, worked a lot with lighting in controlled environments, greenhouse, as well as doing some funky things outdoors with lighting. Worked with Fluence, who currently supplies to all horticultural markets, but originally had a focus on cannabis to start. But then after that, did a good bit of work on hemp before coming to be vice president here at Harborside.
Awesome. I love that you have experience with floriculture and ornamentals. I don't think a lot of people realize how many of our flowers that you buy down at Trader Joe's or at Home Depot or wherever have been grown using controlled environment agriculture. What got you interested in horticulture and controlled environment ag in the first place?
You know, my father and my family are military, and so the extent of their understanding of horticulture was mowing the grass when I was growing up, and so they didn't quite know the potential of the market or know really much about how to get involved, and so I kind of stumbled across it. To be honest, I had to make my own money growing up, like many of us, and I did that through landscaping and kind of just fell in love with landscaping. Kind of had a small business that we grew, and we did contracts for like chilies and cemeteries and worked with different municipalities and ended up working with a lot of different nurseries, and then started to fall in love with different annuals and perennials and shrubs and trees and the intricacies around those. But then from there, ended up going to Clemson and worked with a specialist in the industry named Dr. Jim Faust there at Clemson University. And he really kind of opened my eyes to what the greenhouse industry is outside of my understanding of horticulture, just from kind of a landscape and, you know, outdoor perspective. And so I was able to work with him and do research there at Clemson and get my foot in the door at a company called Battlefield Farms after college. And that really opened my eyes to what horticulture is globally and the complexities of horticulture when it's done indoors in a greenhouse, as well as, you know, what can be done on a completely climate controlled facility. And the interesting thing was at Battlefield, they grew over, I think it was 300 different species. And annually they grew about 2,600 different varieties within those species. And each of these different varieties and obviously different species were grown very, very differently. And so it was just this magical learning experience, realizing the effort and resources that go into buying a $12 gallon echinacea at Lowe's, you know. And so I just fell in love with it.
That's amazing. What do you love about plants in general?
I love that we're dealing with a living organism. And I don't think that many, even who are in horticultural industries, sit back and think about it that way sometimes, because it's not something that, it's a very different organism from, what I think people are used to interacting with. But at the same time, I love plants because you can, if you need to, you can press restart or redo and trash plants and start over.
All again?
Yeah.
Talking about lawns.
Yeah. I don't know. I also love, we know so much about plants already, but I think there's still so much that we don't know. And that's what keeps me motivated in what I do, because we learn every day. I mean, you truly do, and you can achieve the same thing through multiple different ways. And so it's just constantly fascinating. And the more technology and the more precision in these new markets are just causing us to learn at an accelerated rate.
So, I mean, you've had experience with all these different crops, and you've sort of gravitated towards cannabis through your most recent roles. Why is that?
Yeah, I originally wasn't very interested in cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
I just, I wasn't a part of my life as a, young adult. And obviously I experienced it in college, I think like most of us do. But I'm one that likes to be sober. My brain just works better that way, And so I didn't have from a personal use perspective, I didn't have that big of an interest in the plant. But then, when I started to see how similar it was to some floricultural crops, that kind of piqued my interest. And then when I started to realize the intricacies of what we're defining as quality attributes, cannabinoids, terpenes, flavonoids, secondary metabolites in general, and how these are produced or how we currently think they might be produced, that also was of interest to me. And with my other crops that I had worked with, I didn't work on crops that were grown for yield, right? We had, with floricultural crops, you grew for flowers, you grew for flower production. I didn't grow for weight. And so that was something new for me, but yet grown in a very similar way to some of those floricultural crops. And
so you're more growing with ornamentals, you're more growing for quantity and quality than a specific weight yield.
Yes, weight was never a part of the equation.
I never thought about that with ornamentals. With the bunch of roses you get, I don't care about how much they weigh. I care about how they look and how long they are and how many I buy.
Exactly. And you think about petunias, begonias, dahlias, nothing to do with weight, but yet we still deal with the photoperiodic response of these plants. We still deal with trying to have, the best quality flower and to initiate a certain time period and cycle. And so, yeah, I don't know. There was just a few things about cannabis that were vastly different, but also the same. And I was like, I could do this.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about cannabis and, we are harvesting the flower for all intents and purposes. Obviously, there's other parts that we might harvest and use and process, but it is a flower and we call it a flower. And sometimes when I think about the regulations on odors that pervades the cannabis industry, I think about other floriculture crops and even strawberries and peaches and other fruits and vegetables that give off odors. And for some reason, we don't mind those odors. I mean, even Gilroy, right? I mean, you are so close to Gilroy where you are in Salinas there. And I mean, where's the odor control on garlic? I mean, and that's kind of the fun of driving through Gilroy, through like that part of California, is that what they're growing. And by the way, it's just temporary, right? And it's seasonal or whatever. And it almost like, where you are. Right, it grounds you in a way, and they're not spraying perfume into the air, running all these carbon filters to take out that stink. You live with it, right? Like that's what they're growing, and that's fine. Anyway,
No, I'm right there with you. And I've now that I'm here living in California, which this is the first time I've lived here in California, I have experienced that, especially in Gilroy, and to think about how that's just commonplace for most other crops, and it's not for cannabis. There's so many things that have, I don't know, I want to say restricted cannabis, but a lot of the regulations around cannabis still to still to today just really do not make any sense. It really just doesn't. And, we here at Harborside and Salinas, we work with Monterey County, and they're a tough county, mainly from an environmental perspective, I think, compared to any other county in California. But most of the regulations that we have to abide by are clearly validated, which is nice. But I do think, something like odor control, like, come on,
Right.
unless people are worried about theft and where it's located and, things like that. But yeah, just one of the fun intricacies of cannabis.
So why grow cannabis in a greenhouse or indoors for that matter, as opposed to outdoors? What are the benefits and how does it compare, across maybe those three different types of growing methodologies?
That's a good one. Outdoors is just kind of a whole different world in how you approach scheduling a crop versus in a greenhouse, right? So with cannabis, as many who are listening probably already know, it's a short day plant, which means it flowers when given a short day preceded by a long day. And so outdoors, you're subject to your, ambient day lengths or ambient light levels and your natural day length. And so you have to be very methodical at how you schedule your crop so that you maximize production in the one possible turn that you'll have that season. Whereas in a greenhouse, you have, more precision while having the option to take advantage of the ambient environment around you, to benefit your production while you still have control over those things of which you don't in an outdoor environment. I think also, if you compare greenhouse to indoor, greenhouse also offers, lower cost per square foot on a scale compared to indoor production, as well as I think there's a discussion to be had around carbon footprint of a greenhouse versus indoor production, which I would certainly lean on you for. But yeah, I think, my preference is greenhouse. That obviously favors my expertise and background. And so, I appreciate having the ability to use what Mother Nature has given us freely, as well as what I do think plants in some cases are, evolutionarily inclined to utilize in the first place, but then have the option also to fine tune the plant throughout production and push it in certain ways that you would not be able to do outdoors.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that what you just said right there about what plants are sort of inclined to, naturally growing outdoors. What do you say to people who are like, well, indoors we can more precisely control those environmental variables, where in a greenhouse we're still susceptible to the outside ambient environment, whether that's light or temperature? What do you say to those naysayers who say, no, we have to grow indoors for quality or for yields or just controllability?
Yeah, I understand where that mindset is coming from. One of the benefits of completely climate controlled, if you actually have it, is consistency, and the impact of consistency on growth, on yield, on quality. In a greenhouse, yes, especially if you're, there's multiple different types of greenhouses, especially if you're a company that's retrofitted, right? And it's, let's say, an older facility with lower ceilings versus, let's say, a nice glass Binlow that's hybrid and contained and much more controllable. I do think, though, with the right grower and the right understanding of your infrastructure and putting a priority on the intricacies of growing and understanding the impact of the growing environment on the plant, you can have very similar control in a greenhouse. But it just comes, in my opinion, with a certain level of expertise also on just understanding the plant.
Right. And understanding how all those different variables interact with each other. So, yes. If it's a hotter day that you can't control the temperature, the VPD in your greenhouse as well as you'd like to, you make adjustments to irrigation and nutrients, or you shade or something, right, to block some of the light because your plant, will have heat stress. I mean, there's other knobs to turn, right? If you don't have the perfect conditions that you're always looking for.
Yeah, agreed. But then at the same time, in a greenhouse, you could counter for the, indoor, that there's certain times of the year where I can pretty much barely use any energy, just open up the roof and, with some of the highest light levels here in Salinas, be able to let these plants grow as they should without having to really supplement anything.
Right.
And so I think there's pros and cons to, having precision over crop production, but then also, doing everything we can from a cost and efficiency and environmental impact standpoint. And there's certainly trade-offs between both of these systems.
Something that I always think about too with greenhouses is, yeah, you might have more variability than indoors, but is that necessarily a bad thing?
Yeah. Well, and it's like, to what extent is the variability an issue or a cause for concern, right? Can anybody answer that? I don't think so on cannabis. Like, there's obvious concerns of temperature dropping too fast and you possibly hitting dew point during flowering and causing mold, or there's certain things that are obvious. But yeah, what level of variation will negatively impact production? And I think that kind of comes back to the grower and then understanding that system. So no, good point.
And does the adage apply? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger? Does that apply to plants?
Yeah, well, I think that comes up on the discussion of how do we define stress and its impact on crop production. And I think certain growers have seen this. They understand the benefit of acclimating. They understand, or are starting to understand, practices from other markets when we say hardening off or bulking, and what these actually mean. And it's, making the plant stronger, being able to put it in a more harsh environment where you can push more growth. So yeah, I guess to your question, it would be, yeah, it makes you better.
What is hardening?
So I'd say, if we think about the different stages of crop production within cannabis specifically, we have mother stock production, propagation, the vegetative stage, and flowering. And if we have a very ideal environment for rooting, it's a stage in production where we have very, very tender plants, I guess you could say. And we have lower light levels, higher humidity, warmer temperatures, just allowing the plant to kind of relax and focus on rooting. But then once that plant is rooted, we want to, introduce it into a different environment where we're ready to start pushing growth. And so when we move it out of the propagation environment, possibly to the vegetative stage where now it's supposed to be transplanted, I have seen some growers in other markets, as well as in cannabis, have what you call a hardening off stage, where this plant comes out and you allow it, for a few days to acclimate in a part of the greenhouse that maybe is shaded. You don't have as much light as you would once you transplant it. The lights aren't on, the supplemental lights aren't on, but your humidity is lower and your temperature is lower. And so you kind of phase it and acclimate it to be ready for that next stage. And in some cases, I think some could define that as hardening off.
It's interesting because I've heard some growers now, at least going from veg to flower, maybe not from propagation to veg, who have done this sort of acclimation period for a few days. And maybe they start at 5 days and then they're like, wow, this is really delaying our flower period by, a week or several days. So now they've maybe reduced it to 1 day. Or I've even seen some growers just say, screw acclimation. I'm just going to shock the shit out of it and just take it from veg to flower. And I'm curious your thoughts on that. I started in controlled environment ag growing mushrooms. And when we wanted to switch from a vegetative to a reproductive stage, we would shock the mycelia. We would shock that block or that column of mushroom mycelia by either, crazy, we would throw it in the freezer and have a low temperature stress. We would literally drop the blocks and throw them on the ground and have a structural sort of a shock. And it did seem to produce more fruiting bodies. I don't know, the stress was oh my God, I'm going to die. So I better fruit. So, when I think about growers going from acclimating to just, throwing them in the deep end, I'm like, well, maybe there is something to that. Do you think there is at maybe that stage of growth?
So I do think there is validation for that, but in my opinion, later on throughout the crop production cycle, right? So during flowering, I would definitely support some stress techniques on the plant. But early on, I think, when we talk about how we treat the plants, it has to be in parallel to our crop schedule and our cycle time. and how we rotate our square footage annually, right? And so if a grower says, okay, well, I'm wasting a week by having to acclimate. Well, if you're on a weekly perpetual schedule, then maybe you're not, right?
Oh, yeah.
So like, I don't, our crop schedule here is about 15 weeks. It's a pretty long cycle, but we have a perpetual system. So I plant 13,000 plants every week and I harvest 13,000 plants every week. And we turn our square footage within 3 days, right? And so even though I have that long of a cycle time, I'm still being as efficient as I possibly can with my square footage while also allowing the plants to grow and mature as I feel they should have the opportunity to do, to be as productive as possible. And so, yeah, I think some growers also try to speed up acclimation, right? So in propagation, I mentioned, we may have lower light levels, which we do. And then in veg, we pull the shade, right? As soon as we pull them out of propagation and allow them to acclimate. Some growers do push them, right? They have a slow increase of light intensity, right? In combination with changing their VPD in line with their lighting. And they slowly, or well, not slowly, but they try to push acclimation at a faster rate than it would otherwise occur naturally just by moving from one area to the next. And I think for certain systems that favors their production, whereas like in mine, I can build that time into our cycle as long as I have that weekly perpetual system in place.
So is that 15-week cycle based off of square footage, or is there something that you're doing, some advantage that you've seen by having that schedule?
Within our schedule, I have roughly within the cycle, we have 9 weeks of flowering, what we consider to be in the flowering stage, and then 3 weeks of vegetative growth, and then 2 to 3 weeks within propagation and acclimation. And so that to me is what I feel is the proper cycle time for the size pot I'm growing in, as well as the crop density per my square feet, as well as I've been able to break up our flowering square footage into 9 sections. And with the quantity, with the plant density and the turns I need to make weekly, I can fit 3 cycles in our nursery to be in there for 3 weeks and then slowly cycle it out. And so it is based on square footage. The cycle certainly is, but then at the same time, crop density, so plants per square foot, and then what I feel is appropriate for their growth in the pots and sizes of things we're dealing with.
If you were growing an ornamental plant, would you be doing the same level of scheduling planning?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I think some ornamental plants would make it even more challenging.
Yeah, well, because you think, roses in February, bedding plants, in March. You're trying to hit these certain markets and grow these plants during unideal times. I do imagine that could be very challenging.
Well, and it's, you think about the differences between like growing bulbs versus hydrangeas, primula, and poinsettias. I can have all of these in the greenhouse at the same time. They all need different light and day length requirements, and they all need different temperatures. And they're being grown in bays side by side because that's what you have to do in floriculture.
How do you do it?
It's talk about a true, for those large greenhouses and their head growers who forecast these crops, I don't think people realize how much of an incredible feat that actually is to do. Like those are some advanced growers who can properly schedule those crops and time them side by side while also managing all of the environmental needs. So when we're dealing with the monoculture, that is not the hardest thing to grow. They're pretty tolerant. Cannabis is a pretty tolerant plant. Yeah, it is a weed. If you're growing it right, it is. And I think, I've certainly been able to learn some tricks from ornamentals to help me think about square footage and things like that to make this work.
Wow. Yeah, you just think about, like we were saying, these markets and the timing of these specific markets when people want certain flowers and plants. And cannabis is just kind of year round. I mean, maybe there's something you do special for 420, or I don't know, but maybe that's the one holiday that everyone is kind of gearing up towards. But in the end, it's the same plant. It's not multiple different species of plants that have different day length period or photo period requirements or environmental condition requirements, and trying to grow them during an inopportune time to grow them. I mean, shout out to all the ornamental growers out there.
Yeah, really. I know. And they, the margins in that industry, and they're selling plants that were grown for 13 months for $9 at retail. Like, it blows my mind.
Yeah. Wow.
But no, I think, with cannabis, the challenge is consistency, cycle to cycle and throughout the year.
Yeah.
That's the challenge with a monoculture, especially like cannabis.
So what are some of the biggest challenges of growing in a greenhouse?
I'll share some things about our system and how we've dealt with challenges based on it. We have about 205,000 square feet of just flowering plantable square footage. And, we have carbon-based soil as substrate that we grow in. We don't use rock wool, nor will our county allow us, right? So which I think is great, in all honesty. But yeah, we have that kind of substrate, which we have to deal with, right? And it's pretty cost effective to use that type of substrate at our scale, as would other nursery and other greenhouse producers. But with that substrate comes challenges, right? Especially depending on the expertise level of your growing team. So proper management and deployment of, EC and pH into the pot, and then understanding how to manage it within the pot, and the buffering impact over time. And then outside of that, challenges within a greenhouse is, especially with cannabis, which we have no fungicides, no pesticides, nothing systemic that we can use, right? And so we're heavily relying on all of these biological products and soaps and oils. And there's a lot of intricacies around using these so that you don't have negative implications after using them, but then at the same time, they're best used or most effective when being used preventatively. And so one of the challenges in a greenhouse, I think for many greenhouse growers for cannabis, is later in flower, the impact of the environment on botrytis susceptibility in all the flower. That's something that we in Salinas deal with, because we have, every day we have a haze come in throughout the valley. And it's interesting, I was here for 7 months and it didn't rain once. And then I had probably 2 months every day it rained. And so I'm like, okay, well, now I know how disease.
What everyone was talking about, why all the strawberries come from Salinas.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think there's always challenges to managing the environment exactly how you want it to be during all of these changes seasonally and just throughout the day. So yeah, I think there's other challenges too. But
how do you know if a plant is happy or stressed?
Happy. I remember in college when I used that term, Dr. Jim Faust would be, make it clear to us that is not a scientific term, right?
Why
not? And now I understand where it's coming from, but no, I do think.
Well, what would you use instead? Just not stress?
No, I agree with you. Like I think, I think after you grow for a while, you can understand what that means, in a way. So I do think that plants do communicate, in at least the ways in which we manage them, and how they respond kind of communicates to us. But to me, you got to be careful nowadays, especially with being indoors, right? Where you have different light qualities, you have different things in the environment that can skew what you perceive is going on in the first place, what you see, right?
Give an example.
So like, let's say in a completely controlled indoor environment, they're only using blue and red LEDs and not, full spectrum LEDs. You now have a plant that's not green visually to you, has a different coloring to it. So therefore you might not be able to see chlorosis, or you might not be able to see, spider mite damage on the leaf like you would if you were under, sunlight or a different spectra. And so I think, for one, we have to be careful on our reliance on what we see versus the data that we collect, whether it be in the environment or in the soil. But there are certain characteristics that I think we could be pretty aligned on, where a plant, has a certain color of green to it, right? The structure and the habit of the plant looks healthy. It's robust. It's branching, it's leafing at a certain rate, as well as I know here in the mornings when the black cloth is closed, lights turn on, and you see a lot of leaves kind of pushing towards the sunlight in a way. It makes you think that the plants are happy and that they are growing.
Sun salutations.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the growers said one day, they're finally praying to us to keep them alive or something like that. But I think there's other cues like probably glutation, based on how you manipulate the environment and like other kind of cues to how things are working aside from looking at the data. But yeah, I think it takes a grower growing over time to understand what that means. Is the plant happy?
And what about stress? Like what cues do you look for to know if a plant is stressed?
Yeah, so something that I've certainly learned with cannabis that was not near as apparent on other crops was how much it does not like to be waterlogged. And there's a lot to be said for understanding the intricacies of or the complexities of substrate in general. So porosity, and the different materials you're using and how those can restrict nitrogen uptake and other things. But it's been interesting for me to watch how sensitive cannabis is to water. And so there has been certain instances where, let's say, I've had to use a certain substrate because I couldn't get mine because the material supply chain is broken these days, and the plants would be sitting in water because I wouldn't be able to leach that substrate like I would my previous one. And realizing, okay, well, these plants certainly are not growing. They're turning a darker color of green. The leaves are kind of turning under, right? The pH is staying low. And so I think that there's certain cues that are almost opposite of what you would consider being a happy
leaf
plant,
going
right?
up, happy. Leaf going down is, it's smiling or it's frowning.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's been interesting too, in some of our ranges, we have full spectrum supplemental lighting. So full spectrum LEDs. And then in other ranges, we have blue and red supplemental.
In your greenhouses.
LEDs. In our greenhouses, in different greenhouses.
Very cool.
Sure how those decisions were made in the past. But it's been interesting to see plants going from, let's say, a full spectrum greenhouse to a greenhouse with light quality of just blue and red, and the plants going through a stage of acclimation due to those lights. And
so those plants aren't just grown under one of those spectrums, they'll be grown under both.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
So I do think light intensity in some cases trumps light quality, especially in a greenhouse where you have sunlight also kind of diluting that. But
in a greenhouse, you think light intensity is more important than spectrum?
Well, if we talk about energy efficiency and some other things like that, not so much. There's certain things about certain spectra that are certainly more efficient and cost effective. But,
right.
But yeah, I do think that overall light intensity over time is more impactful possibly than your supplemental spectra versus the sunlight that you're already getting otherwise.
Okay. As supplemental light, like if it was if you had rain for 2 months, right, then you're trying to still have a high light intensity. I guess I was surprised because I was thinking more in terms of like inner canopy lighting, that in that case, maybe having certain spectrums down low in the canopy, right, to make up for what's not filtering through.
Yeah,
that spectrum would trump.
Agree. Yeah, I would completely agree with you. Light quality is incredibly important there. Yeah.
Okay.
Where you otherwise are blocking light.
So you're surprised how sensitive cannabis is to waterlogging. So based on your experience with other plants, other ornamental plants, they're not as sensitive to waterlogging or to more water than they need?
I think they are. I don't know. We're also here in Monterey really restricted on what we can use to increase porosity. So I can't use rice hulls. I can't use perlite. We can't use substrates like rock wool. They're very restrictive. And
why
so
not rice hulls? Do they not break down?
If for some reason they have an issue on them composting and their accumulation of arsenic or other things, which we've tested it, and we have organic sources that don't have arsenic in it. But yeah, just another one of those things like, why do we care about smelling cannabis outdoors? But yeah, I think cannabis is more sensitive, probably quicker than other species. Other species can tolerate it for a short time, and hopefully they can dry out by then. Cannabis seems to just, we are too wet. And it just, the plant needs oxygen in the root zone, needs to have porosity, likes it on the drier side. And then with that understood, then you can start thinking about properly managing EC and pH in conjunction with that.
One of our other podcast episodes, talking to Tyler Barris, he talked a lot about water for vegetable crops, and that one of the biggest mistakes people make is overwatering plants, giving them too much love, basically. Like, let them dry out a little bit.
Yeah, I believe that. And when I first started my horticultural career, it was made clear to me that there are different types of growers. There is wet growers and there are dry growers. And that seemed to be ever present within ornamentals. And there certainly are crops that you need to understand water differently than with others. But no, yeah, I agree. And I think with vegetables, it's incredibly important, because if you're not careful, then you can encourage splitting of the fruit and other things, that'll just ruin your product quality in general. Yeah. And then also being in California, let's conserve as much water as we possibly can too. So that, that's a huge part of it also. And it's been interesting to play with this plant. So.
Yeah. There's been research on other crops like tomatoes that have shown that if you start them young, like in the nursery, by depriving them of water and being a dry grower, I guess, that they will grow up to be a drought tolerant plant. And still get high productivity. And I don't feel like that's talked about very often in horticulture. We were talking about acclimation, but what about sort of education of the plant, right? Or training of the plant? If we can start them under one condition and maintain that throughout, could we have water savings or energy savings or nutrient savings or whatever savings? Because we train them young to not need a lot.
Yeah, no, and you're right. It's not, for some reason, it's still a struggle to translate what's already been proven on other crops into cannabis. I don't know if it's the cannabis industry's, receptiveness of the information or of it, it's all highly validated information, right? Mm-hmm. But no, and I agree. Like, gosh, the plants are just fascinating, right? You can acclimate it to be more drought resistant within one cycle. Like, we're not talking about over a generation, right?
Of breeding. Yeah, we're not even breeding the plants to be drought tolerant. We're just training one plant to be drought tolerant. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. But no, I agree with the struggle there, that there's so much that's already proven, that's in an effort to reduce cost while at the same time increasing yield and quality, that for some reason still has not even been adopted nor talked about yet. In cannabis.
So this is kind of a good segue to another series of questions that I have about research and data and efficiency. I mean, you come from a place of education, and the companies that you've worked with have all sort of pushed the envelope and done internal R&D. They've posted and published research, and I'm sure you're doing in-house experiments at Harborside. I mean, how important is research to the success of this industry, whether it's cannabis or controlled environment ag?
Yeah, no, I think we live in an ever-changing world. And because of that, we constantly are having to make changes, or rather improvements, to reduce our overall impact, right, to this ever-changing world, which seems to be going in a negative direction, at least as it stands right now. And I think as far as research is concerned, I would hope people have an appreciation for what they could learn and therefore what they could change based on the result of research, just to be better humans. But then at the same time, there's so much more to cannabis of which we're not even taking advantage of. Funny enough, it's quite ubiquitous here in California that potency sells, right? And there's so much more to this plant than just potency. And when I was in hemp before getting into THC cannabis here in California, that market kind of matured at a rate a little bit faster than the THC market, just because of it going, national and legal, and every farmer kind of jumping in and getting involved, and the amount of biomass that hit the market influenced the market to be more creative and innovative with the reduction in value. And so you had, the whole hemp market all of a sudden break away from THC or CBD, I guess, and focus on other minor cannabinoids like CBG, CBDV. And then you started to maybe have a focus on terpenes and terpene extraction and 100% derived cannabis terpenes in that market. And then you start to have all of these different customers and retailers start to change the value proposition of the plant, right? To therefore now bring new value to the customer to try and secure more sales to stay in business. And so I think research would enable us to build an even more robust but yet validated value proposition for the customer, of which they are eagerly waiting for. Like, the cannabis consumer is very interested to what this plant has to offer. But right now we're only marketing THC. I mean, and I'm speaking as an industry for the
Yeah, no, I mean, imagine if you were only marketing wine based on, the alcohol content. That's ludicrous.
Great example. Yeah. And so I think research, whether it be from a greenhouse and cost and efficiency standpoint, and allowing people to grow with the industry and allow for a reduction in value of the product, right, and therefore more at scale production being made to compensate. I think there's a lot of research that supports helping us do that as we mature as an industry. But then I also think research would allow growers to be able to possibly offer new values to the customer on these other attributes that we have really yet to put any focus on, aside from yield and potency.
Yeah, that's interesting. As a light consumer myself, I don't really want something that's high potency. And I do like that entourage effect of CBD. I like, it kind of cuts the anxiety, but yeah, you see more people going for the high THC content, and I'm like looking for something that's sort of middle, low. I don't need something that is that powerful. And I also really like it when it tastes good. I mean, there's something about that as well. There's one that I have been enjoying recently that is called lemon bean, but it tastes to me like sour apple, and I fucking love it. I don't know where the lemon came from, but to me it tastes like this. But like, thinking about like wines and food and other things that we consume, berries, right? I mean, acidity and sugar and, tannins and just all these other complexities that you get from any plant, even just thinking about flowers, right? Like, I know that a variegated flower has a virus, but it's so beautiful.
Well, and I don't think cannabis customers know what they want. Right, because
we haven't taught them. They don't even know what's out there. They don't know.
Well, and they don't yet have all of the information about this plant to make a decision on what they want. And then there's other false information out there, like the different species, right, of cannabis, and how that has caused consumers to associate a certain response from using cannabis based on species when, wait a minute, isn't this the entourage effect with minor cannabinoids and terpenes and other things, where we could kind of redefine the narrative there and therefore bring some validated confidence in making those decisions and claims associated with active and sleep and whatever else.
Right.
So, but none of this happens with a path to success without research. Like, it truly doesn't. And for, in my mind, for those who don't think that, universities necessarily should get involved or collaboration should occur, it's not going to happen without it.
Yeah.
It's just not. We need that combined brain power, period, in order to move some of this forward.
The mental entourage effect.
Yeah.
The brain trust effect.
Yeah. Two is better than one.
Yeah, right. What does the word efficiency mean to you?
Oh, goodness. The first thing I think
I mean, as a grower, I feel like you could go in so many directions. So, yeah.
Well, I kind of go back to my original understanding of what that term originally meant kind of in school. And it brought me back to kind of, chemistry, physics, and thermodynamics of, energy in equals energy out. And that process in between is true efficiency. And so kind of with that mindset in the background, it's composed of so much in whatever process we're talking about. whether it be within growing, within processing. But if we're talking kind of from just a high level production standpoint, it brings in all cost centers related to production, as well as all usage of all consumables. And then, the practice is tied to all of these. And that's how we can start to define our efficiency. And then there's other methodology that are associated with like Lean Six Sigma thinking that kind of help you gauge and track and record your efficiency over time and make adjustments based on variability and waste and certain things in the system that you otherwise wouldn't notice if you weren't kind of taking on some of those, strategies.
So what variables are you measuring and monitoring to track efficiency? Is it just what goes out? I mean, you must be tracking what's going in and then what you're producing, right?
Yeah. So let's see if I can have an example. So like if we think about just trimming, for example, simple process of trimming, let's say that you have bucked material, right? So you've harvested the plant, it's gone through drying, you've then bucked it, therefore graded it, whether it be A bud, B, C, whatever your category structure is. And then you have trimmers hand trimming the product. Within that simple process of hand trimming, right? What is your throughput per person per day? Is there variation of throughput per cultivar? How does moisture content impact throughput? And then what's the ratio of trim to flower that comes out of that versus the efficiency of those trimmers actually trimming the way our QC department thinks it should be trimmed or the customer thinks it should be trimmed, right? So even just that simple stage of production has such intricacies to how well it could be efficient or how we could improve efficiency.
Wow.
If that kind of answers your question, I'm not sure if it does, but
so how does moisture content affect trimming efficiency or throughput?
So, this is without talking about the quality of the flower, right? If we only look at efficiency of trimming, the moisture content is a quantitative measure of the volume of water present in the tissue, right? So it's in relation to the percent of biomass, whether it be 10 to 12% moisture content, and then that also influences weight, and it influences the amount of moisture present in that now handheld trimmed flower. And so I think that flower that is more moist, has a higher moisture content, is actually a little bit more sticky, right? Because you do have water at different energy levels, throughout that flower that can transfer onto your hands and things compared to if it were more dry. But then at the same time, water activity has a play there as to how, water migrates from the flower onto, let's say, the scissors or the hands of the trimmer. But I do think moisture content, it's interesting you mentioned that now, because, in California, the value of flower has significantly dropped over the past few months. And I've seen certain growers, whether or not they know they're doing this, I'm not sure, but they're producing flower that in some cases has 15 to 17% moisture content.
And right? It passes labs?
It passes labs. But at the same time, the concern comes on water activity because that dictates whether or not you're actually going to have mold, right? And so as long as they abide by the water activity thresholds, then that product can be sold and it can be compliant. And so therefore growers are selling now water instead of just biomass. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. But at the same time, moisture content during post-harvest also defines the cultivation performance if we're tracking finished yield, especially if moisture has weight to it.
Mm-hmm.
Because the higher the moisture content, the more weight I'm going to have.
Yep.
The lower the moisture content, the less weight I'm going to have. And so therefore, you're also dictating the cultivation performance based on that process, which should be part of the whole efficiency conversation also.
I mean, that is really interesting because when I think about hydroponic lettuce, there is some debate, right? About are they selling water, right? Or are they selling substance, right? The wet weight versus the dry weight. And if you were to dry it down, it's like, well, there's actually less less lettuce here because we grew it hydroponically, or because we gave it a big burst of water. Same with like maybe hydroponically grown tomatoes or something right at the end to boost its weight and maybe make a little bit more money off of that. And then if I take that a little bit further, growing lettuce. I love that you're in Salinas or Monterey County because everything comes out of there.
It does.
Right? Like you grow some romaine lettuce in Salinas and send it to New York, and it can lose up to 20% of its weight, which is 20% of its value by the time it gets there. And so you think about the supply chain and who that is going to affect the most, and it's going to be the farmer usually. And so I like thinking, I guess I always thought that cannabis, it has to be between 11 and 13%. But if some people can pass labs and get away with a higher moisture content,
right? Like, yeah, if our standard's 12 and they're producing 17%, then okay, your price should be reduced by 5%.
Yeah.
But no, and it's fascinating. At the same time with lettuce, it's such a great example of a crop that's full of water. Then we have the conversation on smokability and customer satisfaction, which I don't, there's not too much research out there now. And that's why I think 12% would be kind of the sweet spot for moisture content as far as customer satisfaction for burning. But then that comes into play too on how we need to make that decision on moisture.
Interesting.
Which is something else to learn.
I think Health Canada actually has a requirement of 11% moisture content. If my memory is right, like they actually say this is what the moisture content has to be, which is super interesting.
I wonder if they tied it to an appreciation on the impact of weight and value.
Maybe.
If that was part of determining.
Wonder. So, if we talked, so just staying on efficiency for a moment, is it easier to reduce your inputs or increase your outputs?
It's certainly easier to increase my inputs. But I think no. I understand.
Good answer.
So can we reduce inputs while increasing outputs? And I do think that you can.
Okay.
And I think especially within cannabis, there's been multiple individuals and companies that have proven that on fertilizer, based on how many cannabis growers
that's good.
Get pre-mixed fertilizer, and all these other things.
Yes. Oh yes.
But I think you have to have a system that to an extent allows you a decent bit of consistency and automation in order for that to happen. And if we want to increase outputs, then I need precision on dosing, or irrigation specifically per plant. I need to make sure that when I do change the different dials within the growing environment, that it happens within a certain time stamp, and that I get the environment to be where I want it when I want it. And all of these things, help you become more efficient, reduce that input cost with a goal of increasing output. So yes, I do think it certainly is possible, and cannabis can do a much better job at doing that compared to how the industry has in the past versus petunia producers who show us up in 2 seconds. So.
In terms of energy, I mean, you're growing in a greenhouse, so I have to assume you're using less energy. I mean, you're not air conditioning your greenhouses, right? You're using pretty conventional pad and fan cooling and ventilation, right, methods. And you are doing some supplemental light in the winter? Yep. For a greenhouse, are there energy efficiencies that could be built in that, if you could invest in anything to reduce the energy use input, is there something you would do?
Yeah, so for one, I will say Harborside has invested in doing about 11 acres of solar. So that'll take us off the grid.
That's awesome.
It is. And it's the first time I'll admit that I've kind of dealt with solar, and it's amazing the trade-off there. But as far as in production, I think there are certain technologies right now that would reduce overall energy use, like monitoring of DLI versus just thresholds of light intensity on supplemental lighting.
Okay.
I think there's, with that, you could achieve more light accumulation while being more efficient with how you apply the light. And so there's something there, which if, like our houses, we have 5 acres worth of greenhouses that are all outfitted with supplemental lighting. That would be quite impactful. And so, yeah, I think there's, whether it be monitoring in the soil environment with EC and pH on how you manage your inputs versus just, readings on a once a week basis manually. I think all of that, allows you to fine tune and reduce energy.
But do you guys heat with electric or with natural gas or propane?
Yeah, we have natural gas.
Okay.
We have burners that are only used secondary to primary floor heating. So we do use floor heating to be more efficient.
Oh, you do floor heating. That's awesome. So you have a boiler then that's delivering hot water?
Yes.
Nice.
So with those boilers, and a benefit to having boilers, if you do have a system where you use those for radiant heat in some way, you can also capture CO2 as a byproduct from those. And so we do capture that.
You do?
In our greenhouses, yeah.
Nice. Do you actually run the boilers during daylight, or are they mostly operating at night?
It kicks on and off based on the settings that we have in place. So it could be either or both at sometimes. But we also have kind of a recirculation system with them.
Okay.
We kind of be more efficient with heating and cooling of the water and it being recirculated.
So with 11 acres of solar, will you guys switch to electric boilers?
I haven't gotten that far.
Okay. Or heat pumps or something. So tell me, how you kind of brought this up earlier about supply chain, and I'm really curious how COVID and coming out of COVID or not coming out of COVID, I don't know where we are right now, but how has COVID in general over the last couple of years, can you believe we're in year 2? How has that affected you and the operations at Harborside and maybe even just controlled environment ag and cannabis in general at large?
Yeah, no, very much appreciate the question. And like you, I can't believe it's been 2 years, and I can't believe how it doesn't seem like we're even close to being out of this yet. And then being able to experience the ramifications of it throughout the entire supply chain globally has been something to experience. I'd say my biggest takeaway, at least from a production standpoint, that COVID's made me aware of is the true value and importance of a at-scale production system having automation. Before a pandemic, when you think about a grower who's making a decision on being manual in their greenhouse system or going from being manual to being more of an automated grower, as part of the automated value proposition, nowhere in there did they say, oh, and we also bring value to you when 12 of your growers are all of a sudden out for 14 days due to COVID, when your system's built on hand and brain monitoring through everything, lighting, venting, black cloth, irrigating, you name it. And it's truly given me a new value to associate with automation that I otherwise would not have considered as impactful before. I never would have sat back and said, oh, well, half of my workforce could be gone tomorrow, when trying to consider the value of automation versus being manual in production. Whereas now, well, if we have another pandemic, that's possible. And I need as much as I can being controlled on my computer so that production doesn't go through the cracks, and our production is ruined, is really been something. Because these spikes and valleys are just kind of constant, right? And we're seeing it all throughout the country. And all of a sudden, a greenhouse that has everything manually hand watered, for example, no longer has those irrigators present. They're gone for 14 days. And then if you were to replace them, that expertise is not there.
No.
And so it's a huge risk to not have automation if you understand the impact a pandemic can have on production.
It's interesting because I feel like automation up until maybe COVID and this pandemic has been a lot about labor efficiencies, right? And reducing your cost of labor by having automation. Also, maybe precision of control because you have machines and sensors that are not humans, that have human error associated with them.
Yep.
And so do you think, and maybe there's been pushback or maybe not seeing necessarily the value add by, losing jobs or having to transition jobs. Do you think that more growers are going to be sort of nudged into automating their processes and operations because of this pandemic? And how do you think that's going to impact the workforce?
Yeah, no, I certainly do think that growers will now be more inclined and certainly more incentivized to be prepared for the impact of a pandemic, of which automation can alleviate that risk to an extent. And the way that that'll impact is our labor force is just a reduction in jobs, in all honesty. That would be the impact of automation. And then for those jobs that you do have to manage the automation, it certainly would be an increased skill set or an increased experience level, and therefore a different kind of, quality of worker for those jobs. Not sure if that's the right way to say it, but it's hard, right? Because in some cases, costs are, especially with cannabis, you can have reasonable costs with manual controls, right, while offering jobs and doing what you can for the people in these communities regarding being a business that is able to support them. But then at the same time, overall risk and then just securing the survival of the business, automation now has a whole new value to it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, as someone who maybe wasn't sold completely on automating every process ahead of this, I mean, why was that? What was your skepticism or your reluctance to automate certain things?
I do think certain systems or certain systems, meaning different greenhouses or teams, they may not know enough about the crop to automate it yet.
I want you to expand on that because I love that statement right there.
There's a lot of learning that comes along with hand watering, right? Simple example. And for a grower to mature in their career and to gain experience, they have to be in full control of growing that plant. And some could argue with me, but I do feel that there are certain systems that don't quite know enough about what the plant should have, when, at what volumes, at what concentrations. And so therefore automation is almost intimidating. Yeah. And so I think, and to answer your question on why we possibly don't have more automation, I think as a business over time, we've made the best decisions at the right time, and we're slowly moving more towards automation. We just are where we are today, based on how we've made decisions throughout the market so far.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say that I'm sort of in the skeptics corner, as much as I love data and as educated as I am, because, yes, data is king, but what do you do with data? Data is not information, right?
And not everybody's an analyst.
No, not everyone's an analyst. And yes, we can put monitoring. So, if I just think about environmental controls, yes, we can put environmental sensors, in a room, and we can give them a fancy schmancy, user interface to look at trend data and look at what the conditions are right now or last week or whatever. But most people have no idea what they're looking at. They have no idea why something went up or down or is flat. And they might think flat is good, and flat might mean flatlined.
Yeah.
It might be dead,
really.
Right. And so, it's the same when people say, oh, we want a central plant and chillers. And I'm like, no, you don't. You're a grower that has like 10,000 square feet. You want to now be an engineer and like manage like this chiller system? That is a nightmare for you. Like, let's keep it simple. Right. Yeah. And so I appreciate you saying, that you can learn a lot just by hand watering the plant and working with that plant from beginning to end to really understand it. Because are we really going to rely on machine vision to decide if our plant is smiling or frowning?
Well,
right, the right shade of green.
Couldn't agree more. And at the same time, like where the sensors are placed in a greenhouse has a huge impact on the data that you're looking at and whether or not it's representative of that whole section. And those little intricacies, the grower won't know till it's too late.
Yeah.
Of which, if you were in there every day dealing with those plants, changing manually the temperature, you would feel that towards this side it's cooler than this side where it's warmer. Oh, and that's why we're covered in mold over here.
Right.
That comes with experience. And so I do think that there's a lot of growers who they're intimidated by it, and they're not analysts of data, nor do they have a background in plant physiology to kind of understand the intricacies of managing the environment through automation.
Right.
But at the same time, I do think there are some vendors out there who offer decent technology to give the grower somewhat of a recipe. But
absolutely.
Still,
and I'm definitely not anti-data or anti-controls and automation. We live and die on that in HVAC, but I don't want to lose the touch. Farming, right? We're farming after all. And this is our greatest occupation, right? And we've been doing it for 10 or 50,000 years. I don't know, depending on which resource you look at. And there's just something about it that is the human experience that I don't want to remove. And I know there's less humans who are farming, but the ones that are, let's give them the credit for being the masters of nature that they are.
No, I love it. I'm with you. It's at the same time, if I sat here in front of a computer and tweaked our entire system, I certainly would also not learn as much as I do from actually being in the greenhouse, which I love doing. We learn every single day, right? And that comes with, you being with the crop, not on a computer.
Exactly. So do you consider controlled environment agriculture, and maybe you can be specific to cannabis if you want, but do you consider it a competitive or collaborative industry and community?
I think outside of cannabis, it is incredibly collaborative. I think within cannabis, we're slowly getting there. What will it
take to get there?
Well, I think there's a lot at play. There's all of these startups, right, which have different motives, for why they're in business in some cases. And it causes them to hide behind confidentiality when sharing data to hopefully keep themselves safe. But I think that's part of it. I also think that, there's a lot of legacy cultivators out there that may have some interesting practices up their sleeve that are not yet scientifically validated for the reasons they may think they are, but they think that's kind of the secret sauce, right? Which, in my opinion, there's no secret sauce. We need to learn what that is, and the only way we do that is through research and collaboration. So it's interesting. When I first started working at Fluence, I don't know, 5 years ago, the industry was incredibly closed-lipped. Like you couldn't go anywhere without signing an NDA. You couldn't even walk into a greenhouse. Like, come on.
I know. Somebody wouldn't let me take a picture one time of their fabric duct. And I was like, are you freaking kidding me right now?
Oh my gosh. And I will say it has changed from there. Like there are growers now who come together and talk about, different practices, different things. There's sharing of, fertilizer recipes. There's tours being done freely now. Pictures, can be taken. People aren't as closed-lipped as if you were growing an alien species. This is just another plant, another short day plant, to be honest.
Yeah.
And there's so many things that we could learn from each other and just really increase the pace of development of this industry if we did it.
Why do you think it's opening up? Do you think people are realizing that value of working together?
I think that they have hit a wall the industry, based on, let's say in California, the value of flower has dropped, right? And it's causing the businesses who are here and who are still alive to be better, produce higher volumes, produce better quality at the now new value. And because of that, certain growers have hit a wall. They can't get past it. And the only way to get past it is learning and learning from others who have different ideas. A lot of growers stay within their facilities and they have, those horse blinders that horses have on the sides of their head. Yep. They don't see past their own production. Whereas if you were to just 2 or 4 other facilities, you might fix the issue you're having with pH control. You may fix the issue that you have, with something else. And so I think the industry as it matures is causing growers to collaborate in order to continue to participate in the industry.
And I think also it's going to help with the legitimization and validation of this industry, is that the more that we talk to each other, the more we're talking, other people are learning about what we're doing, and it becomes less scary. It becomes less fringe and more accepted. And I think, a lot of that closed lippedness also was maybe out of those legacy growers that were growing in a very different environment, legally and politically, and were trained or conditioned to not write anything down and not record anything, and stay very close to their local community and not share because they didn't want to get in trouble, to say it simply. And so my hope is, by talking more to each other, that we legitimize this industry more and everyone is more successful.
Yeah. No, I don't think you could have said it any better. Yep. Agree. Completely.
So how do you predict the industry is going to evolve over the next 5 or 10 years? Is there anything that you've seen that you're particularly excited about?
I'm excited about there now being consumer interest on other things than THC.
Yeah.
That gives us the opportunity to now, work with different genetics. It gives us the opportunity to redefine what we consider to be productive in the greenhouse. And I think in the next 5 years, we're going to, not knowing, legality nationwide, how that's going to pan out without speaking to that. I'll say that I think the market is going to become more focused on data and more focused on conveying the proper information to the customer, and therefore now acquiring new customers because of the new value outside of just getting high, with this plant. And that's with me talking about from the California market, producing flower mainly. I'm very excited to see how we expand on this plant and start to really understand the entourage effect and understand, like, something that we've been dealing with internally is, when you think about terpenes per pound, you have a percentage like you do with moisture content or potency. And the question that we had posed is, do total terpenes smell stronger than individual terpenes? And, that simple comment, I haven't yet got an answer, but we did a blind test here at the farm. And I had one that was testing around 1.5% terpenes. And then I had another one that was at 4% terpenes, and the 1.5 smelled stronger. And it's like, so it must be one terpene that humans can detect possibly, stronger than others. And I'm like, we're not even talking about this at retail. The customer's not even, And so I just think in the next 5 years, depending on how collaborative we are and where the research is focused, it'll be really interesting to see what's next.
Yeah. All right. So last question. What do plants crave?
Oh, gosh.
You had to know this question was coming.
I did. I did know it was coming. I usually would like to think I'm prepared for things, but I think plants crave an environment that is suitable for growing. And I say that, and I see your face here, and I know those who are listening do not, but I think the question then I would pose to you is, do we know truly what the suitable environment is?
Oh.
Right? Or is that something that we're continuously building and they constantly crave? I don't know.
Okay. A non-answer. A question to the question.
Yeah.
All right. So So how I end every single one of my podcasts is I ask 3 rapid fire questions. So they're meant to be fun. Okay. Just real quick answers. Okay. You ready?
Okay, I think.
Okay. Number 1, are plants introverts or extroverts?
Introverts.
Why introverts?
Because they are very selfish.
They are?
Yes. Yeah. But I don't know how that. See, this is where the rapid fire just like ruined my brain. I don't know how that has anything to do with the introvert or extrovert. So let's go to the next question.
That's awesome. I love it. Okay. Can cannabis create a more sustainable world?
Oh, it certainly can. Yeah.
Why? How?
I mean, if we just think about, how we could use it from a textiles perspective versus just even
sure.
plastic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we didn't talk about hemp at all, but
no, but just that, and then the regulations around how we grow it are automatically more environmentally friendly than traditional ag, and so completely.
That's a plus. Okay, if you could crossbreed cannabis with any ornamental flower, what would it be?
Oh my, I have not thought about that.
You're gonna go home and really think about this, but you have to answer it now.
I have to answer it now. It's funny. There's certain ornamental plants that I love, and I'm thinking about crossing it with cannabis and what that would turn out into. And some of them I don't think would look very nice.
Would they smell nice?
Well, the first thought I had was begonia, and I'm like, that wouldn't look. What the heck would that look like?
What would that look like?
I don't know. And then a poinsettia. Poinsettias are almost boring. Gosh, Nadia, maybe a zinnia.
Okay. Yeah. Why?
Maybe a zinnia. Because cannabis needs more color.
I like that. I like that. Add a splash of color.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, love it. Awesome. Well, Travis, this was very fun. Thank you so much for interviewing with me today. I'm really excited to get this out to the world, and I can't wait to see Cannabinia plant.
Yeah, there we go.
A Zinabis plant?
It's in the pipeline.
Okay. All right. Looking forward to it. 10 years, right, of breeding, right? And then we'll get there to the Zinabis plant?
Yes, perfect. We will. No, I loved it, Nadia. I appreciate the opportunity and always love talking to you. So, thank you.
Thanks, Travis. All right. Have a great one.
All right. You too.
Thank you for joining Dr. Nadia Sabeh as she sat down with Travis Higginbotham of Harborside Inc. Join us next week. We'll be speaking to Michelle Hackett of Riverview Farms. I'm Dana Swadan, and this has been The Doctor Is In with Dr. Nadia Sabeh. Thank you for listening.